Swadont Dios. Swadont Dios. Swadont Dios. Yawaskano Gogwego, Sonoko Gani Yaso, Lindley B. Logan. I am going to be serving as the MC for this evening's event. I am on staff here with the House of Welcome, Squigwielt, Longhouse Education and Cultural Center. And I am also a past Washington State Arts Commissioner. It's a extremely welcome opportunity to welcome you here to Squigwielt, the House of Welcome. It's been a while since I've been able to participate in something like this that is actual in person. So we're very excited that you can all join us. Looks like an absolutely wonderful crowd. Big shout out of thanks to our tech crew from Evergreen because they always do a wonderful job for us when we do these events. But before we get started, I want to invite Kara Briggs up. Kara Briggs is the Vice President for Tribal Relations, Arts, and Cultures here at the Longhouse House of Welcome, and she's going to share with us a tribal acknowledgement. Thank you.
Thank you. I will also say my traditional name in the Wenatchee language is Lhaq'temish, and I am a Soxwattle citizen. We gratefully acknowledge and honor the Squaxin Island tribe, upon whose traditional homelands the Evergreen State College is situated. For thousands of years, their ancestral families lived and thrived here. They named Bud Inlet, directly to the east of us, Stachas, and Ild Inlet directly to the west, Squattle. Today, the Squaxin Island tribe continues to live on and steward the lands and waters of the southern Salish Sea. We also gratefully acknowledge the Puyallup tribe, whose traditional lands Evergreen's Tacoma campus is located upon. This acknowledgement is one step toward respect and collaboration with the aim of uplifting the voices, cultures, and histories of the tribes of these lands and waters. Thank you.
Aishka. I'm going to start with the language intro, so if I could ask our tech crew to pop that language intro up so I don't have to do the interpretation for that. Thank you. And I'm going to do this language in my language. We are known amongst ourselves as Onondagatwa, which translates to people of the Great Hill, AKA also known as the Seneca Nation within the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy. So I'm going to do my intro in my Onondagatwa Goano, my people of the Great Hill language. Nyawaskano Gagwego, Sanogoga Nitya so Niwage Sano de Ne Honondion. Onondagatwa nia ne ko ne agenyo kwayo. Tonawande Onondagatwa yointza de nondagate. Lindley B. Logan Nikya so ganyo o kaha. Lost my place. Bremerton, Washington, Niknongate. I've been in the Salish Sea area for 23 years now. It's been a phenomenal ride, a wonderful place to be in, and I've been here at the Longhouse Education and Cultural Center for about 15 of those years. I want to welcome you to Squigwielt in Tawano language, which is the Suquamish language. Squigwielt translates to House of Welcome, so welcome to the House of Welcome. The House of Welcome, the Longhouse Education and Cultural Center, opened in 1995 here at the Evergreen State College as a public service arts center. Mary Ellen Hilaire, Lhaq'temish Lummi Nation, was the first Native educator working here at the Evergreen State College. I bring this up because Mary Ellen Hilaire is a pillar of the Longhouse for her advocacy and support for the House of Welcome. In Indigenous culture, specifically in many Indigenous cultures, but specifically in Maori culture, architectural structures and the pillars are referred to as ancestors. Ancestors who hold up the structures. It is this Indigenous worldview perspective that we acknowledge in Mary Ellen Hilaire being a pillar of the Longhouse. She asserted that Evergreen is not a place to study Native people, but a place to study the world from an Indigenous Native perspective. With Native perspective in mind, we are pleased to partner with the Washington State Arts Commission for this Indigenous Voices, an evening of poetry and conversation public program presentation. We have a wonderful evening scheduled for you this evening with Indigenous poets to share their voices. Those Indigenous poets, if I could invite our Indigenous poets to take their places up here at the stage. Laura Day is Eastern Shawnee. Here comes Cedar Sigo is from the Suquamish Nation. Arianne True is Choctaw Chickasaw. So to Arianne, I say halito. And we have Rena Priest, Lhaq'temish Lummi Nation. So the way we'll present this evening is we'll provide each of our poets with 10 minutes with a Q&A to follow. The Q&A, these little note cards are for your questions. We have a couple individuals, if we could have our runners raise their hands. They will pick up your questions and bring them to me, and I will read your questions. If you could put your name on your question so I can acknowledge who's writing that question, and if you want to put where you've traveled from to be with us this evening. My favorite radio program, KEXP, does that all the time, so I thought I'd work that in. Okay, so the poets will I'm sorry, Rena. Who has merch? I know Rena does. Cedar? Cedar, do you have merch? Books? Yeah, we all do. Yeah. Okay, the poets do have books that they will have for sale. So when we are done with the panel presentation, they will be set up somewhere here. And they will be selling the books so that you can interact with them. We also have refreshments in the back in the Cedar Room. You're more than welcome to stay, interact, mingle, and enjoy some refreshments. So let's get this party started by welcoming Laura Day as our first poet presenter. Laura, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Yahweh, thank you so much for that really gracious introduction. I'm going to follow suit and say hello in my language. Hoesi pekonia, haka hoesi lasimamopue, Laura Dana desido. Hope everybody is doing well. I really appreciate being able to read with this company and in this space. So I'm going to read a poem that engages with the space around this area. I think that it will bring a sense for me of being on the land, but also the complications of place. And it's a long poem, so I'm gonna go ahead and read the whole poem, and I'll read this whole poem for my 10-minute set. This poem is called The Fort Conundrum. Grave climate of sod fir, with the smell of frescoes, leather, parsed hoof, and wasp nests. Long, parallel gashes offer envelopes of perspective. Two historical enactors eat from the tops of their thighs. A curious child scales a fallen log and reaches for an owl. Slivers of a deep water passage and salted narrows press vertically into blue-lipped smiles. Fort infiltration is a cool medium. I enter the bodies of the places and capture the southeast bastion, noiselessly climbing the creosote stairs. If asked, as I prod the corners, I disclose only that I am a woman and a mother, a stranger who has been here once before, smelling of spiky herbs, cured skin, and linen on a rain-soaked line. I am moving formally across the parade ground in silken-boned silence. My intention, earnest, objective, and received instruction is to set fire to this fort, and then the next, and to burn each one to the ground. Would you like to ask me any questions? Queries a man with an axe hanging from his hips. Please. Imagine thousands of warriors riding in a single file so that the fila lasts for too many miles to walk. Weave the word manifest and stitch all the donation tracts in the primary colors of a trade blanket. The whitewashed door of the officer's cabin with the word Tyee embossed on a brass plaque opens to still air and carpeted floor. Tables are scattered with maps, marked ledgers, and salient points. The word salient comes from fortification, simply an angle pointing outward to the plane of engagement. Think of how many limped in darkness from the citrus smell and camphor sweat of these rooms. Walk the perimeter, identify points of attack and defense. The territorial perspective, sure, but watch for the eyes, scanning each path of retreat the structure could birth. A chemise is the inner walled enclosure of a castle or fort. Note the intimacy, the invitation to rip. Volunteer potatoes sprout in the corn rows. There are no more dogfish in the creeks to oil the skidding logs, though howitzers are still cached in pits. The anachronistic beaver skin felt hats, distinctive millwork, the oldest settler granary building in the state with the last remaining example of distinctive posts on a sill architectural style. Stand on the russet boardwalk, watered with some engine oil, some dribbled apple juice, some fish scales, some blood spill. A fort is a mask. Each fort is every fort. Come and cross the nation, back to a starting place. Consider the compass complications. North, a thing of rocks. South, a soft, breathing matriarch. Red, the felt dyed in cochineal and madder. There is dry wood yet to gather. Forts on the river mouths, on the inland highways, on the treacherous bays and estuaries. Forts wearing coquina stone, felled cedars, 7-foot adobe, or pine stakes pierced into the sand. Fortification is an inherent kind of architecture, stones stacked by hand to probe eternity. Relics of the stockade posts are whittled to hourglass. Sun glints from the broken glass and jagged tin, once windows, now detritus underfoot, to touch the pen, to bombard, to put up spears and stride the foundation. Remember the wars, edifices forged in the shape of throwing stars, in the shape of a stallion's head, a long trundle bed in the shape of a rutilated tongue of treaty vellum, regardless of the route. Forts will be overcrossed beneath subdivisions and military bases and playgrounds covered in wood chips, and just above, the corpses of slaughtered war ponies, thousands of acres of burned corn. Brandish a blazing torch of pitched fire. How can a country hold this many cardinal directions? An advanced work stands outside the perimeter, but within artillery range, like a dancer stretching tendons in the beaten grass at the verge of the circle, or a scholar, fingers on the leather spine before opening the tome. Pen or match or toe struck and poised. In the factor's huts sit the books of occurrences, smoked oysters, bushels of turnips, recipes for mange and promises. Should I come again to war, I will hang them all. In 1832, an edict forbade the naming of military posts as cantonments, camps, posts, or blockhouses, only the permanent nomenclature of fort. to indicate an accomplished incursion, therefore permitted. A fort drug up from the slim creek for the viewing pleasure and edification of the public. Brass buttons and period homespun, aprons available for purchase in the gift shop. A cordon creates a magistral line. I underline the text themselves, a minute portion. I am not a natural child anymore. I have no need of the contrition of the forts, their mission statements or land acknowledgements, long tunnel pits lined with wolves' teeth. Warriors likened the pennant flags hanging from fort bastions to the tongues of serpents. The fort is on fire. It is in the swollen maw of the sun. The coastline exerts an old will. Creosote-soaked logs submit to the tongues of heat, hissing and sputtering. The fires are tended. Here now a fresh dancer glides into the point of entry. Never the same smoke around the shoulders. Menyelechko call out and give courage. Hands fervent, spilling heat. I'm carrying flint on me. Call out and give help. Give some courage, breathe past the smoke. I walk now beside the wetland, following runnels in the gravel to the shuddering sound of water. Mounds of anthills and clouds of gnats are my dancing partners. At the estuary, there are children playing, bare feet across the flat pebbles and shattered ribbons of eelgrass. Salt water clears the air. Salal and fern and sientes, cedar bough parapets of green and flat, pebbles and eelgrass across the winter villages. Smoke is rising from my palms as I submerge them into the rake of the tide's eternity. Nyahweh, thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing my fellow readers.
I'll use this one while our tech crew is addressing these technical challenges and issues. That was absolutely wonderful. I want to say, as Onondaga and as Shawnee, we both share many very similar cultures. So Nyahweh in our language is thank you. When I said the intro, I said Nyahweh Scano. That means I am thankful that your health is well. I said Nyahweh Scano Gagwego. I am thankful that your health is well, all of you. So post-pandemic, that's a great thing to be able to say. I want to say appreciate your presentation, and there's just so much that you said in there in regards to just kind of awakening my consciousness to the terms that you use and the landscapes that are littered with the terms that you use, especially like fort. I mean, I remember reading a poem one time, and the term was used was fort, and I couldn't help but think in my limited English translation, I was like, oh my gosh, now they're even turning nighttime into a fort. Everything's a fort. Does anybody have any questions for Laura? Does anybody have a question for Laura? I don't see any hands. I will then ask Laura a question, and I'm going to ask Laura a question because remarkably, there are 4 of us up here, Cedar, Arianne, Laura, and myself, who have all attended the Institute of American Indian Arts. So since we haven't, there are no questions, I'm going to ask Laura to kind of share that experience as a creative writer in that creative writing program, which is an MFA program.
Wonderful. I really appreciate getting a chance to talk about the Institute of American Indian Arts. So I attended in the late 90s, and at that time it was actually an associate's program. but it was an incredible place. There was a really tremendous poet named Arthur Z, who was the poetry teacher and had an incredible influence, I think, on a lot of the writers who came out of that space during that era. And it was a tremendous cohort. So for me, it was the first place I started writing in this Indigenous space. I had, wonderful classmates. Sherwin Bitsui, who's an incredible poet, was one of my classmates. We were actually roommates as well. And so it was this tremendous place of learning. And I've always maintained that had I not had that opportunity to be in that space, I don't think that I would be a writer. I don't think that I would have thrived in a different kind of space. So I'm really grateful. I also really have kind of deep love for that region. My husband is from San Ildefonso Pueblo, which is just north of where Santa Fe is. So I feel like I credit the school to that happiness in my life as well.
Wonderful. And if there are no questions, we're going to move on to the next poet. So I'm going to say Halito to Arianne True, who is Choctaw and Chickasaw Nation, to present. Thank you. Welcome, Arianne.
Halito Lindley, Chokma everyone. My name is Arianne True. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Laura, for starting us off that way. It's making me think about changing which poem I do, which is pretty typical. You want me to tilt the mic? Yeah. Better? Good? Cool. Thank you. Okay, so hi. I'm so excited to be here. This building is beautiful, and we were talking a little bit. That reminds me a lot of where I went to kindergarten, and so it just feels like very nice and like cozy. So I've got a couple poems for you. I am going to read. This one is from, I have a manuscript that I have finished and I'm shipping out. It's called Exhibits. This is one poem from it, and it's called Imago. I spend hours watching cicadas burst out of their own backs, shocked every time by how green-veined the new wings and how legs manage to pull out of themselves, both sets nearly hollow. Could their joints still flex when they wore two skins? The imago is bigger than the nymph it was, and this new flesh has organs for sex. Where was all that body hiding? I check their husks. I check my own body. Some days now, I feel like I'm crawling out of my own skin, pushing something off or prying my way out. I want with my teeth, ready to bite. I want with my limbs. The desires have gotten so specific, but there are so many. Mouth on neck, just so. Her hands easing me out of this shedding skin. It feels dewy and unformed where it finally touches the air. My new skin, flex the wing joints, rustle. What's next? Thanks for whoever did the whoop. I came up in like slam poetry traditions, so I love when people make noise. It's like very soothing to my system when you're loud. So thank you. The second one I have, a friend of mine commissioned me to be part of their project. Brian Dang this fall was working on a project about like things you can't say to people and language and translation and close relationships. And I didn't know growing up that you could write love poems to your friends. I thought love poems had to be romantic, but I love my friends. And this is a love poem to my best friend that I get to live with. And it's called Poem at the Sink, Write Your Friends' Love Poems. The small branch of flowers you pinned above the sink months ago has dried and kept its color and catches in the front of my hair when I lean in doing dishes. Sometimes the ribbon, sometimes the small flowers that hold their small bells out from the stem. They move against and lift the front of my hair. It's painless and sweet. Reminders. In a hardest season of my life, you have filled our house with flowers. Some days, 6 vases or more, pulling jars out of cupboards to fill with dahlias, zinnias, chocolate lace, glads. You grow them all. Some days they are all that keeps me upright, the model of their stems. The beckon of those rich heads, color and color and color. You put them there. Days they are all that keep me going. Your hands in the soil once planted those days. A small blue flower falls face down into yesterday's tea left on the table under the bouquet, and it has become so every day to me. So has the wall full of construction paper shapes cut for fall, garlands and ghosts. and the dough rising under cloth, and the sandals in the doorway, and your glasses on any surface, every surface, different by the day. How the familiarity makes it all sweet. Tonight, you are listening to music in your headphones while you cook dinner, humming along in the halting way of being so quiet that some of the notes drop their sound. How many people will ever barely hear this? I am spoiled by and thankful for intimacy, to share a home, these years at least. There are not enough love poems for our friends, so I make my students write them. I write this one. That night in July, our trip north on the floor of a yurt, sharing the mattress like this, my friend rumbles snores against my back. The heavy draw of their in-breath pulls and rattles the air between us, the air under us that makes up the mattress. Just a bit rattles the air in my own lungs, or the space between ribs, the back of my head and the air between hairs falling to the pillow. We almost touch this way, or maybe we do, and it feels solid like a hand at my back, a resonant comfort in our dry spaces here, loud with the morning rain on a thin roof. And over that, inhales draw like a bow across cello strings. I think you'll laugh at that, maybe. What I'm trying to say is that I love turning out all the lights and walking around in dark, familiar rooms. How even when the light feels gone, it just takes time to realize it's only gone thin. The way I have a map memorized of the furniture and walkways, don't need to see to navigate. I just know, just know. Thanks, bro. I have one more for you, and this will be the rest of my time. This was also for a commission this fall, and it's called Grief Lessons, POTS, which is a chronic illness that I am blessed by. And the grief lesson is a phrase that I saw in an Ann Carson thing and was just like, oh, I know about grief lessons. So I'm borrowing that from her. I've been taking grief lessons these years. My body, this clear teacher, holds my hand fervently as it buries me and asks, what will you be later when you shake off the dirt? Some days my body is just a collection of breaths I feel move my chest and stomach with a little more quickness, a little more motion than what I think health means resting. All limbs limp, I ask any surface to hold me up, every surface. Thought comes back in its own time, no rush but blood rushing. It's been 3 years now, more, 3.5. I'm not talking about what you think I'm talking about, not us, just me, and when my body caved in. If you lived close enough, you felt the aftershocks, felt the shockwave when I fell maybe, but I was silent when I collapsed, how I had trained my body to be. Add that to the list. I ouch for every nick and bump surprise, but when it's bad, I go quiet. I laugh. Add to the list every time I practiced that. I still practice it, but I practice other things now too. She tried, little me, called out. That's already on the list. I forget it moments, but she did, thank God. This illness is my body retching back up every moment someone, including me, asked too much. What we pushed through. Even if it was to survive, there are prices, can be, are here. It is not all my debt, but I pay in relapses. This week and the days I can't get up. The next better days, cogent in bursts. I can have a conversation if you can wait a few hours for me, the next few lines. I am giving this everything I have. It's habit. My body pulled rank, rest a constant command. I have no more mouth to argue, jaw bound together by the same set of decades we endured because we keep deciding it's better to live. People used to compliment this more, how I kept going. Less now because I don't tell them. So few understand this is inheritance. 200 years of my blood taught me we just stay alive. You can recover from the rest. All my body asks to know now is rest. My cells have made a heavy pact with gravity and the oxygen comes slow. They wonder if my blood is sluggish. I know my blood has run from everything that tried to kill it. My blood is not sluggish, it's exhausted. You don't know what it's like to run like this. Whole generations of lives and then mine too. I still remember the moment my footsteps stopped in stunning 4K resolution from the perspective of the no one else who was in that empty back room. How my heart pounded against the inside of my body like it was screaming to be let out. My vision black or television static. Grabbing the chair, not fainting. Why do I keep refusing to faint even when I need to? And waiting for someone to come in and then still having to tell them why I couldn't stand. They couldn't even tell that I should have gone to the hospital. I didn't, out of practice with that care. It's been years of these blurred, hard edges I can't see myself fall onto. Training as a conjurer, I study how to sweep the mist back before the boat runs aground, but sometimes the hole still creaks wooden and high, and I know this is a day I give up on. We switch to listening. The blood does not forget. Sometimes I do, but these grounded days pull my ear back to that heart, pounding louder and faster than it should to help me hear. I am listening slowly to the grief lessons my body carries from me, from so many years of my family. These episodes of flashback to the winters I should have gotten to be so much more still. We would have told stories I crane to hear now, but laid out like this, they come through better. Slow down. There is nowhere to catch up to. And clever girl, you outran what was chasing you. Some of it, at least. The rest, you can take in a fight. I have seen you be scrappy. I would like to see you so soft. And we do, most days unwilling, as the body pours itself over the couch cushions. You might not believe there are bones under there. But there are bones, and unforgetting blood, and I just keep hoping, 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 please, that the longer I listen, the more my heart will learn to live somewhere between silent and pounding, will find a soft, quiet insistence we can sustain. Chokmashki, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for raising it when you speak. It's great. When you're done, just lower it.
Sure. Chokmashki. Arianne. That was absolutely wonderful. Does anybody have any questions for Arianne? And if you don't, keep in mind, Cedar will be next. So if you want questions for Cedar, then after Cedar, we will conclude with Rena Priest, the Washington State Poet Laureate, the first Indigenous Washington State Poet Laureate, I must say. So in acknowledgement of Arianne saying she grew up through a poetry reading stand-up, what did you call it? Slam, yeah, and she likes people yelling out. In traditions of Res Dog Millionaire, or Res Dogs, I'll say, ow, ow, ow! So if there are no questions, let's move on with Cedar Sigo from Suquamish Nation. I say, Adida, Cedar Sigo.
Does this sound okay? Can anyone hear me? Okay, good. That's good. I just want to say thank you to the poets, mostly. And I'm going to read some poems, and then in between, I'll read some paragraphs from a book of criticism that I had out a couple years ago. I find that people are as interested in the life of the poet and in poetics as they are the actual poetry. So why not just go to the well? So I'll start off with a couple poems from my newest book called All This Time from Wave Books. Is that my 6th collection? Some terrifying number. Let's see. This is called Solarium. Uranium-tinged black opal-like truth. We demand the end of money as poetry demands unemployment, always in deference to the received, freakish over imagined conduct, nightmare alleyway. It's the signature tick, the demon guardian you must slide past with your tongue that morphs as you age. Sometimes writing is waiting for a panel of clouded glass to come clean. Did I dream Sophie Tauber Arp as a silhouette, sweeping a pile of Swiss francs? I remember asking workers to remove the microphone from the round room, big mistake, which the gallery may have taken as a traditional choice. Colossal visions twitch, imposing variation in rhythm, the forest through the city and back. What if I am already dead, calm and feeling undivided? I will have to begin to make art in the old ways, to even fake at breaking even, attempt to form daylight or sing to myself and choose to retrace it, old threads of yellow varnished, blown to the edge of a white ravine. The scene is such, the wall itself is torn. Thank you. And this is called Instructions for Esther Baylin. Tape record the snow falling and fall to sleep. Burn down a gas station, not so secretly. Hello, thank you. I want to spend eternity worn into a rock. A mask emerges, 2 small eyes, 3 poems in place of clouds. Have a party in the dark and call it a concert. I was reading over my shoulder, hearing nobody answer the bell. Map a little farther out, attempt to unwind. Keep speaking in received asides. Play these 3 notes out of turn. Now leave the room, join the dawn, and walk the city with your deadly cough resolute in pieces. Crash against the cattail mat, peel back the tatters, see stars, count windows instead. Harry Callahan poem. He was a great American photographer. The poems are so minimal because the garden is part of them. Mirror left in a meadow of seagrass, the lights point their own way out in tiny stabbing gestures. Desperate devil at the end of a crowded field, just his head with both arms held over as one. Shadows break to fake a moment, the rest pass. Cold lake water, eye level, behind a screen of winter trees. Venus left lying on a white blanket, green intrepid ferns or standing nude before the backlit blinds, exquisite doorways, comb the sand into pattern, into evening sun and well-worn brick. My flowers hang from a ceiling of leaves. Poetics. Let's see here. I do not read music, nor do I play an instrument of any kind, though I have been accused more than once of singing my poems. At first, I was slightly put off by this description, thinking my accents, silences, or pauses within a line to be fairly subtle, but now I think I know what it was they meant by this. I never let the music of the line dissolve completely, and those edges, though always fading fast, will attach themselves to the next island of words, but without ever dying away completely. Every utterance is overlaid and connected acoustically in performance, no matter the mists and miles across them, as John Wiener once wrote, what we would traverse to be together. Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, I have bookmarks in here. Okay. The real contents of a street poet's suitcase. Tiny dented copper spools, an elephant gun, clean underwear, red Garland records, red in Bluesville, red alone, a pair of counterfeit Vachel Lindsay cuckoo clocks, empty pocket rocket for net, cerulean rabbit's foot keychain, turquoise money clip, 17 cents, stained satin pajamas, golden sardine with underlined lines and figures, Apollinaire never hiked in papier-mâché woods, Apollinaire never slept all night in an ice house. This is called Side Trips. I saw at my desk nightly using only street light. I blow dry the basement tape for Jack to read, my drunken crash at the gates. Endless cartoon colorblind blues. The ghost of John Jacob Niles is flown to what graven rock? Shaking in his boots, he melts the ravine, drinks up the river, a sun-wasted rose color. It was only a baggage room and attic, here where we lived before the war. That first broken window over, it shocked me with the levels of felicity and of imagination inside. Twin angels at the underpass, stripping wire out from the earth, bolts of thunder peeled from under the falls, stones thrown from very high to form a ziggurat, an hourglass I almost forgot to intone. The blood in the iron bowl, the old warehouse torched on a quiet night. Formulas opening the floodgates, meaning my ode to Martha Diamond, meaning a blank book for Lucy Rose, classic, tiny, split-second poems that clung to the air beneath my gaze. I'll read one little more bit of poetics here. This is talking about one of my favorite poets when I was a teenager, Robert Creeley. In his actual writing, I was taken with his minimal and cutting approach in terms of what made it down onto the page. I could understand each and every word used in the poetry. The words used were often quite short, words like things, one, fact, if, edges. All of these seemingly simple words are made so jaggedly present through an incisive patterning. It is not the words themselves, but the space they take up as marked, as reset. They have to be read with this constantly sharpening edge, otherwise in the end they seem to carry no weight. The whole drama of his reading style, so evident when hearing him live, seemed to hinge on the action imposed by his line breaks, as if their collapsing framework made it possible for Creeley to complete the poem. The intensity was felt in his cutting of the brush, his hacking out of large, permanent, asymmetrical pieces. I experienced his poetry as an invitation to write. And I will close with this one poem from one of my first books, Stranger in Town, published by City Lights in 2010. Oh, and I want to mention I'm Suquamish. I am Suquamish as well, but I'm enrolled Suquamish, not Suquamish. Prince Valiant, your first presence is that of a con man down on his luck. You cross on the ferry and return as it gets dark. Heating a pair of candlesticks to warm the studio, I was to live quite comfortably at the end of each needle to receive my ghost. I took out a writing room also among derelicts who would pay unwittingly the highest prices, besides the apartments for their dry cleaning and drinks, top of the mark. Soiled by each groom till I reached the morgue, one we can lean on in our ascension to heaven, to China fields and the cufflinks you had better recognize. It was more of an open invitation, and should he care to appear, good thing it was recorded. His walking seaside, his being punished for talking Indian. A bronze bust soon to be unveiled in Pioneer Square, the greatest of all features in its design, mercy, the brass ring, and clear purple tomb in a doorknob. Thank you.
Haishka, Cedar. Does anybody have any questions? No questions? I have a question, but it's for all of you, so I'll wait until after Rena presents. And so I'd like to welcome the Washington State Poet Laureate, Rena Priest, Lhaq'temish, Lummi Nation, OCM.
Haishka Linley. Ait tangan nostalgia o helixan quanasatla tiakaias, sa hueltanat, sa nasnat chachlamisan, So happy to be joining you all and to be joining these wonderful poets here this evening to share some work and to have a nice dialogue. So thank you. All right, I brought my new manuscript, so hunker down. Just kidding. Let's see, I think we'll start with a poem welcoming you all to Indian country. Oh my gosh, I left my glasses up there, so we're gonna see if I can do this just kind of. Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right, welcome to Indian country. Where is Indian country? It's everywhere we stand. It's anywhere we dance. It's where the earth loves the feel of our feet. Welcome to Indian country. What does that mean? It means this is where we lift our voice in song and make a joyful drum beat so our hearts can sing along. Welcome to Indian country, this beloved country here, where we honor our ancestors by growing stronger every year, by making laughter the answer that wipes away our tears. Welcome to Indian country. What does the future hold? In uncertain times like these, we reach for words like hope and things we can be sure of, sunrises, beauty, love. Welcome to Indian country. It's everywhere we dance and where the feast is truly grand. Welcome to Indian country. Now give us back our land. So it was so nice to hear about the experience that Laura had at IAIA. I wish that I could have gone to IAIA. No, not to diss on Sarah Lawrence. I had a great time at Sarah Lawrence, but I think it would have been quite a different experience. I had a professor one time tell me, I don't really think of you as an Indian. And then he gave me Sherman Alexi's book, The Business of Fancy Dancing, and told me that if I could write like that, he could put me in touch with those publishers. And I was like, thanks. And I was so salty about it. Like for years, I've written 3 poems about it now. And this is one of those poems, and it's called Daffodils After Wordsworth, because I always loved that poem by Wordsworth, you know, I wandered lonely as a cloud, and he comes over the hill and there's that field of daffodils and his spirits are lifted, right? And that's what poetry has done for me and kind of maybe like what I seek it out for. And so anyway, this poem, Daffodils After Wordsworth. The Indigenous poet writes life-affirming poems about daffodils. Her audience says, but you're oppressed. The Indigenous poet writes poems of outrage about oppression. Nobody cares. She gets depressed. The Indigenous poet gets requests for poems about being Indigenous. But all my poems are about being Indigenous. The Indigenous poet isn't considered an Indigenous poet because shouldn't you write about genocide? The Indigenous poet tries to write poems about genocide. Her poet spirit dies. Genocide gets the job done. The Indigenous poet says, "Stengsa tamchila," and writes about daffodils and the untouchable beauty of living a poet's life. So that phrase, "stengsa tamchila," it means what the hail, like hail that comes down from the sky, you know, because we don't have swear words or the concept of hell, so it's kind of a joke. I almost said "stengsa spachwang," which is what the fog. But I think, you know, that would be too far. The ancestors, they might be like, no, no, no. So anyway, I'm shopping this manuscript around now, and I'm thinking, as I'm sending it out, you know, Like maybe, like the theme of this event is the world from an Indigenous perspective, right? And I'm like, can they handle it though? Let's see this poem. What is it called? It's new, or newish. Gosh. And everything's all out of order because I put this together just very recently, so let me see. Oh, there we go, number 17. So speaking of the concept of hell, we didn't have it. Can you imagine, 200 years ago, nobody here ever burned eternally in the pits. So this poem is called "You Shall Know Them by Their Fruits." That's from Matthew 7:16. The Library of Congress has a Gutenberg Bible on display. Oh, also, this is a true story about the Library of Congress and the person in here and everything. But the Library of Congress, you walk in and you would think like lots of books, right? No, I was there just last spring. You walk in and there's lots of marble and then the names of some Greeks, I think, and then you like go up some stairs and then there's the Gutenberg Bible behind glass and then that's it. Like the next time you see books is if you get a card and you go into the reading room. Otherwise, the Gutenberg Bible, that's the Library of Congress. Okay, so you will know them by their fruits. Matthew 7:16. The Library of Congress has a Gutenberg Bible on display. A monument marking the moment it all went to hell, I say to myself, as I turn my back and walk away. As if she can hear my blasphemous thoughts and thinks herself on a mission from God, I am petitioned on the street by a Christian youth who asks if I believe. I tell her my Indigenous ways serve just fine for me. She asks, what is that, like New Age? No, I say, it's very old. It predates Christianity by about 10,000 years. She asks, what will govern society if not God's command? I tell her about resonance, the works of your hands in harmony with what you feel and what you think. She argues that society and God must show the way. I tell her how society and God results in stolen Indian land and stolen Indian babes buried in unmarked graves behind churches. She says that as a woman of color, she knows the sins of the colonizer. Then she says, God is good despite how individuals behave. I smile, resist the urge to tell her the truth. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit. Okay, let's see. That's as far as I had planned out, so now we're just going free for all, okay? Oh, this one. So the thing about, like, what is Indigenous literature? And I'm just like, what is it supposed to have talking animals? So here's my poem with talking animals. And it's called Squirrel and Wolf Contemplate Perception. It's not that I'm insincere, says Squirrel. It's just that the term squirrely makes everything I do seem comical or naughty. When you see me dragging a sunflower up a tree to survive the hungry winter, you think, oh, that rascal, he's gone and gnawed off all my sunflowers. I know what you mean, says Wolf. People always mistake me for being so deadly serious. They don't understand how much fun we have, me and the rowdy pack out in the wild, cold night under the full moon's light, ripping our dinner to shreds. Okay, so I think, well, let's see. How about this one? We'll go serious. Go back to serious. It's a little roller coaster here. So the writer Lee Miracle, she's from the Stalo Nation in Canada. She says that violence against the earth has a direct correlation to violence against women. And I've been very intrigued by that idea. And so I don't often write very autobiographical poems, but this one was commissioned by the Museum of Northwest Art. And so, let's see. So this one is about my life. Okay. And it has an epigraph. It's a Cheyenne proverb that says, "A nation is not conquered until the hearts of its women are on the ground." And this is called Nations Made of Homes. Also, I guess there's a footnote here that this is from the BIA.gov website, so the Bureau of Indian Affairs. For decades, Native American and Alaska Native communities have struggled with high rates of assault, abduction, and murder of women. Community advocates describe the crisis as a legacy of generations of government policies of forced removal, land seizures, and violence inflicted upon Native peoples. Okay, nations made of homes. Is this why they kill our women? They know home is no good without them. 40 years ago, my stepsister's mother went missing, was murdered. Her body found in a riverbed. The house I grew up in was filled with her absence. My mother tried to make that home happy and bright, to restore its grand and beautiful life. But the walls were covered with grief like flaking grim lead paint. Grief poured from the taps like mercury. Grief hung heavy in our chests like black mold spores. At first, I was too young to know what all that sorrow was for, but I felt it. My stepsister cried in the dark of our shared room. My stepfather was restless and glum. My mother wept and moaned that she lived in the shade of a ghost. For me, it went on for almost a decade until I grew up and moved away, out into the fresh air and sunshine. But that feeling clung to me, the sense that something was missing, had been taken away, that at any moment the world would be torn and never mend. My mother eventually abandoned hope of ever making that house her home. Now she lives alone, complains of ghosts. My stepsister finally laid down in that river of her grief and went to the other side to find her mother. And that house, that once grand and beautiful home, is boarded up on all sides, the windows, closed eyes of the conquered. So I'll close with a poem that was also a commission that I wrote recently for the State of the State address, but also with this in mind, the treaties. So this is treaty season, and the 22nd is Treaty Day at Lummi. That was the day in 1855 that Governor Stevens met with the Lummi tribe and other tribes, Nooksack and other tribal nations at Point Elliott, and the Treaty of Point Elliott was signed. And so in commemoration of that and thinking of that, thinking about the theme which I was writing to, which is a vision for equality in 2023, I sat and I thought, what does that look like? And as I thought, I realized, it doesn't look like a vision, it looks like a memory. It looks like a memory of what tribal nations, how we governed and what that was like, where the rules were that nobody went hungry and nobody was homeless, and, if the fish were running or if there was food, it was very based on equality. So this poem is called These Abundant and Generous Homelands. Warm at home in the long cold days of winter, how and why should it trouble our thoughts, that eternal question of the haves and have-nots? We are not thoughtless or hard of heart. We give what's fair, do our part, and the privileges we claim as our share, those we reserve without reservation, perhaps even unaware of our good fortune. Perhaps never having troubled deaf heaven with our bootless cries, we walk well-heeled through our blessed lives with ease, or maybe we stride with shrewd purpose in shoes made for long days of toil on our feet. You have yours and I have mine, and aren't most of us just trying to get by? But still, the hungry, they are always with us. And isn't the worry always that if we pause our labor too long to care too much, that we shall be counted among them? How can equality be anything but a utopian dream for those whose history and legends tell only of statesmen and kings, and whose concerns are less and less over the justness of wars as much as they are for the accumulation of more? Yet we live on lands where equality bloomed once before, when Indigenous nations lived by beliefs and followed ancient laws that said an orca whale and a cedar tree are sovereign sentient beings with inviolable rights, just like you and me. Those beliefs are not childlike or primitive. They are the blueprint for a just and fair society, which for Native nations is not a vision, but a memory. That sublime belief in the wisdom and goodness of the giving earth is not so elusive, is not a birthright exclusive to tribes. Yes, it's mine, but it's yours too, if you want it. If you want it, you must tell new stories, true stories, on which to build new beliefs, true beliefs, in the interconnection and value of all living things. This supremacy of man is only fiction. This is the secret every river knows, for water rises and falls, and in a circle eternally flows from the cloud to the mountain, through the valley to the sea. Thus is a circle, a balanced, perfect, and natural state of being. And who are we to interrupt it? We do so at our peril. When the forests burn, our eyes burn, and our hearts fill with ashes, and when streams are dammed and wanting of salmon, doesn't our blood also want of vitality? This is the folly of hierarchy, with man at the top. We reap the fruit of inequity, a harvest of terrible hunger. Now is the hour of our reckoning, a moment of dire lack. Though unrehearsed, we must summon the courage and the will to act, to assure our children a better path forward. And when we look back, will we see that, in fact, we were not recovering from natural disasters. Rather, we were the great disaster from which nature must recover. With hindsight for eyes, we must sail toward a beautiful vision, an era that is trying but hopeful, demanding but healthy, whole and equitable. We will be steadfast in our course, carried by the winds of change into a more balanced way of being. For while free will is at the whim of our human nature, nature loves balance, and so our nature is humane. These truths being self-evident, if all are created equal and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are our legacy, then we must each wish that for the other and repair this world we've borrowed from our children. We must recall a time when we did not have the things we think we need, but had the whole living earth for free. As long as the rivers run, as long as the tides flow, and as long as the sun shines, you will have land, fish, and game for your frying pans and timber for your lodges. These were the promises on which this state was founded, these sacred homelands in which the call of eagles resounded resplendent from the tops of towering cedars, where none went hungry when salmon were running in clear, cool waters. These abundant and generous homelands were given in exchange for the promise of a world we could live in, and of a world that would keep giving to all in common for as long as the rivers run. Aishka. Thank you so much.
Hi, Rena. I am going to go ahead and ask a question, but before I ask that question, the phrase you used, "we reserve without reservations," caught my attention because we recently ate at a fancy restaurant, and we walked in, the host said, "Do you have reservations?" And of course, I grew up in Tonawanda, so I said, "Yes, Tonawanda." And he looks at his notes and he says, "I'm sorry, we don't have a reservation for Tonawanda." And I said, "Do I need a reservation to eat here?" And he says, "Yes." And I said, "Tonawanda." And he says, "Sorry, I don't have a reservation for Tonawanda." And I said, "Can we still eat here?" So with that challenge okay, let me ask this audience question. This is a good one, and this is for anyone who wants to respond. The first one is, do you have poetry dreams? And I do believe somebody responded that they did have poetry dreams. But who wants to take that first?
Can I respond with a poem?
That's awesome. Absolutely.
Okay. This one's a new poem. It's also brand new. It was a commission, and it's supposed to be made into a song. And so here we go. I'm trying it out on you because I don't know how it goes yet, like how it goes out in the world. Okay. It's called Dream Passage. On the path we walk toward purpose, if we feel we've lost our way, if our confidence deserts us and we fear we've gone astray, when the road stretched out before us is a challenging terrain, this is when we search our heart for a passage back to grace. Our dreams have wisdom to impart if we are true and brave, and though the night is dark, there is always a new day. When every door we try is locked and the view out every window is of that lonely road we walked, full of worry, want, and woe. When the stream of life within is blocked by living in our sorrow, this is when we search our heart for a passage to tomorrow. Our dreams have wisdom to impart if we are true to what we feel. Yes, indeed, the night is dark, but our dreams have answers to reveal.
Aishka. And here's another question. What would you like to ask?
Arianne has an answer.
I have an
Okay,
answer.
wonderful.
I don't know if this is going to work, though. Do you have to turn it on manually? Okay. I have not really dreamed in poems, but I have dreamed in comic panels. And when I go too long without teaching, because I teach a lot of poetry, I start dreaming in lesson plans, and I wake up and I have to like frantically, but it's not poems, it's lesson plans about poetry specifically. But I have done that.
Thank you for that response. Here's another question, and whoever wants to respond, please step up to the mic. What would you like to ask your favorite poet if you could interview them?
Well, I guess I could add. I guess a good question, I think, for any poet, especially when, if someone's your favorite, then you could assume that they've been doing it for some time. And I just think the most interesting question to a poet that late in the game is, how did you continue without support? Or if they happen to subsist outside of the academy, so much of the better, because that's an even better story, because there aren't a lot of safety nets set up for us as poets. And then we're even in this super subset of Northwest Native poets. So every one of these little subsets has little, some amount of support, but it gets smaller and smaller, and you really have to ingratiate yourself with the community a lot of times to find out what is available. So that's what I would say. It could be any poet. I mean, the style is almost irrelevant.
Yeah, that is really interesting in regards to your comments in response to that question as a poet. And I say that because our son is a comedian and he's Native, but he doesn't do Native comedy. So it's a challenge for him to try to find that place to fit in as a comedian, comic, but doesn't necessarily do Native comedy. Yeah. Here's another question. Do you have recommendations for our first poetry?
Oh, it's okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
That's right.
Absolutely. We want to hear what you have to say.
I'd say I've met some of my favorite poets, and I wish that I would have thought about that question, because I usually just go, oh my God, it's you. just like stand there starstruck like a goofball. So that's good to think about. I still don't know what I would ask most of them, though.
I have one thought, which is I think I'd be curious about what other arts they did before they committed to poetry. Like, what did they do when they didn't think they were an artist and they were just playing and doing kid stuff? Like, what was really fun for them then in arts?
I like that too, because I think that's what gets lost so much in art making as we mature. The element of play is often so lost. I mean, for me, I set up quote unquote forms for myself or prompts, but really it feels like second grade, like how to just get the voice going. And we lose those openings that we create for ourselves as children, I think, often as we get older.
I thought you might have something to say.
Me? Oh, no.
No, Laura.
Yeah, I'll respond just to keep it symmetrical, you know? Yeah. I really love asking poets anything but poetry questions, because I do actually think poets have this incredible sort of like capacity in the mind for ambiguity. So hearing them talk about general things I think is really fascinating. And I feel like as poets we're rarely asked questions about non-poetic subjects. So whenever I meet a poet, I always try to ask them something much more pedestrian, and I think it's always pretty delightful.
Thank you for that question. Okay, this is the last question from this individual. Do you have recommendations for a first poetry book for kids, or favorite poet for kids?
A Light in the Attic.
Oh, yeah.
My favorite poet when I was in elementary school was Edgar Allan Poe, which says plenty about me, but like, I do feel like you should give your kids nice things, definitely, but like, I feel like kids are really gross, weird, dark creatures, and they need to be met there.
Also, this is not a book of poetry, it's a book of fairy tales by a poet. It's E.E. Cummings' Fairy Tales. It's amazing. I used to read that to my daughter all the time. I loved it. And then also there's a DVD, or I guess a video by They Might Be Giants, and it's the alphabet sings, or something sings the ABCs. I can't remember, but it's also amazing. The kids, they love that.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll read this next question. Could you pass Rena's glasses down to me? I'm just kidding. So what is your advice for young Native poets and writers trying to find their voice and confidence in that voice?
I definitely have one for that. I would say, first of all, don't let any person decide what your material is and what material they want you to be tackling. Because I feel like you can tell this, I mean, not here obviously, but a lot of other places, they'll front load your reading for you when they find out you're Native, queer, what have you, whatever they have on paper. They'll kind of front load these expectations of maybe what you're going to talk about and all of this, and they just want this Native perspective on anything, but that's not always like switched on for me. Sometimes I'm just scribing so fast I don't even know what I'm writing about. And I feel like as a Native writer, when I was very young, I felt like there was these expectations about content that I didn't understand and didn't care to translate, because they were often needs expressed by non-Native people, which was very confusing to me. If you notice, my work is very collaged. It moves very fast. I don't think you could identify my race necessarily. I mean, I chose some poems with lines in there you could probably identify, but really, that wasn't a concern for me early on. It was to not have my work pinned down by other people before I opened my mouth.
I would say just write, just do it. Like, you know, if you feel called to it, the page is somewhere where you put your thoughts, and nobody ever has to read it. And if you ever worry about anybody reading it, don't, because like, you know, later when you're trying to struggle with finding an audience, you're like, oh, I remember when I was worried about people reading my journal. Like But just, put it all out there. And then if it works, there could be something to go back to later and then make it into something. It'll kind of jump. It's weird. It has its own weird little music or hum or whatever. If it has a desire to become something else, then you just, follow that little hum.
One thing I would say and that I try to work on with my students is I haven't used this analogy before, but think of yourself like a filter, in that any advice someone is giving you or any feedback someone is giving you on one of your specific poems or on you as a writer or you as a person, you get to filter that, and anything that doesn't work for you or make sense to you just gets to fall off the back. Even if you really respect them, even if you like them, even if you love them, even if you really think their work is very cool, you know a lot about yourself, and that is really, really important.
These are wonderful. I think that there's two things that I would add. The first is that I think this panel is actually a great representation of something that I would want to, be able to talk with a young Indigenous writer about, and that is that there's a vast capacity and diversity of Indigenous poetry. So I think it's a really expansive and abundant space, but sometimes you're confronted with a limiting force. So being able to get yourself into Indigenous writing space where you kind of cure that limitation or that mindset of scarcity with some sense of abundance. And then the other thing I always feel doesn't get discussed as much outside of sort of Native space is how much what you do has a beautiful benefit on your younger folks in your community, and how, writing means that there's a lot of young folks watching you write. And, that I think is a really special element of being in Indigenous community as a poet, that you can kind of see that it's not just a singular act, you're kind of providing an outlet for people who might be watching you as well.
Thank you for those responses. This is a great conversation because as an Indigenous contemporary artist, I deal with a lot of the same issues in regards to your responses. And, are you filtering yourself and knowing the venues that you're participating in? Are you curating your work for that specific venue? So for instance, when I participate in contemporary Native American exhibitions, I definitely pivot in regards to what I'm going to show that I feel that is relevant to that audience. And then when I'm doing a different audience, for instance, I was going up to Port Angeles to do a Stadium General presentation, and I realized some of my artwork in that exhibition was a little bit challenging to the value systems of non-Native people and a non-Native worldview perspective. And I started rethinking whether I should have included those pieces, because in the world we live in today, you can't always be sure you're going to be safe in a environment you're not familiar with. So with that in mind, how do you deal with discrimination?
Have I dealt with it? I don't know. Okay. I'm sure I did deal with it. I just think I went I think that I just saw that if you're a Native writer, people, a lot of times they hesitate to think of you as a bohemian in any way. If you're Native, often, you're seen as sort of a cautionary tale sometimes, or they assume you came out of poverty, this and that. I might have, but that doesn't mean that I'm confused about sex or drugs or anything dangerous. I actually might like those things, and that's okay in your work as a Native person. Be dangerous. Don't. I mean, who are we pleasing with this? But trying to be, this upstanding. I kind of want to be seen as dangerous. Is that wrong? I mean, I welcome the darkness. Bring it on.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I love that. I think the discrimination thing, I have practice from being a woman, most of all, like even above and beyond being an Indigenous person. I'm a woman first, and you know, I used to be like small and quiet and soft voice and everything, and like my cousins would be like, "Oh, that's so funny. They just don't know you, Rena," because I also have like, if I need to, is will speak my mind and stuff, which is kind of surprising, I think, for people like when you encounter a like petite, quiet woman to kind of get an earful if you just cross me or whatever. So lots of experience with that kind of thing, and when I kind of came into being like a professional, that's when I experienced professional discrimination, like the assumptions of like, what my capabilities were. Like a lot of people ask me, did you write that poem? Like how many times have I been asked that? Right? I'm like, no, I just kind of like I beat someone up in the parking lot and this is their poem, but it's mine now. It's shocking though, like the assumptions that people make about your ability, or like being told like, wow, I understood everything that you said. And I'm like, I was speaking English, and it's, so that kind of thing, it's mostly I just have to deal with it internally, and I usually do that by making fun of people in secret behind their backs, so. Just in all honesty, so. Or with cousins,
Rena, I love that. I love that so much. Like has come up before so far in both of these. Like there are so many axes on which you can be discriminated against, and I think I respond to different ones differently based on like how tired I am of that particular type of discrimination at any moment, and how much energy I have. But I think I have like two main strategies, and one, they're both kind of to make it clear that this will not be a fun time for you anymore. One is to just be like very direct and very boundaried and just go like full emotional intelligence on, when you say this is how I feel, this is the impact it has on me, how are you going to respond to that? Because people get really bored by emotional intelligence, I think, when they're confronted with it. And another one is, the other way is to like make it, this is what I used to do a lot when I got a lot of sexism and like catcalls at one of my old jobs, make it very clear that it's going to be really boring now because they're about to hear a lot about history and context. So I either am really clear and boundaried or I troll people. But I like to respond to them directly in the moment because that helps me not fixate on it later. Like I am just there in that moment for my closure, and if they learn something, that's nice for me because it would be nice if it happened less. But mostly I want my own closure before I leave when possible.
I find this really difficult to think about because I think like one thing that's really important for Indigenous creatives is to know like it's not that you're not good enough, you're so good, too good. And it's not that you're not cool enough, you're just so much cooler. And so, once that takes so long to understand, and it's really hard to be in spaces where you are experiencing being marginalized or, even seeing folks who are not doing the work in the same way that's as compelling be elevated. And I think that interior sense of, being able to confront that is really important because it seems it's everywhere. And it's, those of us perhaps who have children, we see it happen to them too, so it's not over. So I do think that interior sense of reality and not distorted reality is really important.
Thank you. And one last question. I don't want to leave this out because somebody did take the time to write this down. How do you do the research or perspective gathering for your poems?
I mean, I know people are going to want to go home eventually, so yeah, no, I'm happy to answer this because I do feel like I am a heavily research-based person. And I really see research in a lot of ways as it's kind of like a battle And I feel like I have to sort of protect myself before I move into that territory of research. But it's also a compulsion. I feel like, you know, just as we would have warriors go out for the community, that's how I feel when I, you know, spend hours mapping out the site of a fort, which is a place of danger, place of spiritual danger. Or, you know, Rena mentioned treaties. You know, the Soanwatwe Shawnee people, we signed more than 20 treaties over the last 200 years. So that's lots of words to go through. But I think I find it very important. And I think that it's something that poetry is uniquely well suited to, because you get to filter so much information that I believe that research can be a really fascinating exercise as a poet. So yeah, I'll pass it along from there.
I'm autistic, so research is my happy place. It just makes me feel nice and comforted, especially with hard topics, but also just in general. So like, I love doing research for my work, and sometimes it looks like being on these like absurd Wikipedia rabbit holes. And there's this kind of like, I feel a little bit like I'm a crow, like looking for like shiny bits in it of like, ooh, that detail is like really sparkly to me, so we're saving that and we'll see how we fold that in. But I also think of research as like, you can do these kind of like interior research moments, and I really have a good time sometimes writing poems where like the research is going as deep into an experience as I can, either into like a memory or into like a specific moment, and trying to just like feel everything that's there, like all of the senses, all of the emotions, all of the thoughts. Like that is also data gathering, which is all research really is, I think. Or like asking other people about like things like that. So like there is the like outward, but there is also inward research, and I think it's fun when you can do both if you like research.
Yeah, I think that, so I squirrel things away. I don't know if I necessarily research, but I think, like you're saying, the shiny bits, I squirrel the shiny bits away in some like little pocket in my mind, and then I go back to them and write a poem later. Like when my daughter was in 5th grade, she came home with this fun fact that when you get the feeling of goosebumps, it's the feeling of your body trying to grow hair really, really fast so that you don't get cold. Like she learned this in 5th grade science, right? And it just sat there somewhere in my brain for like probably 10 years. And then I wrote a poem about it last year, maybe longer. How old are you in 5th grade? I don't know. Like 8 years it sat there. So it just popped into a poem. But yeah, also feeling the thing that I love about poetry, one of the things is that you have like poetic license, right? And then there's that thing that Keats says about negative capability, which is, you know, the poet's ability to do their thing without irritable grasping after fact and reason. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do any irritable grasping. I'm just going to put all this down here. It's all going to be true because I say so. And then, you know, maybe I'll try to back it up later. But sometimes just not even.
Yeah, I use research. I mean, I have some poems, like probably 3 or 4 poems, and they just run throughout my books, and they're called notes on something. I think there's one, notes on Joan Crawford in one. There's notes on Nicolas Poussin, this like 15th century French painter. And in those cases, I just started learning these facts, and they were kind of luminous, and then they started acting like musical phrases, and then like gossip, and then they were a poem. The notes, the research itself was a poem, and moving like a poem, and had it to be situated like one. And so research is poetry, I think, too, in its best possibility.
That is a great creative response from all of you, especially in my being a multidisciplinary artist. I do the same thing, everything, dating my sketches in my sketchbooks, and I, you know, might look back and say that sketch has been in my sketchbook for 20 years. So yeah, totally understand what you're saying. So I want to give a big shout out of thanks to our Washington State Arts Commission as partners with us here at the Longhouse. You could raise your hands if you're with the commission, or if you're a partner with the commission. I know we have partner members in here also. Raise your hand, Julie. I see you over there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yep, back there in the back. Thank you, thank you. I know we do have some Longhouse staff here. Laura, if you could give a wave. I think Kara left. Sky Bear Media, give a wave. Thanks for the photography. Again, our tech crew over there that always does a wonderful job here at the Evergreen State College whenever we host events like this. A reminder that some of the poets will have literary merch available. I'm not sure where they're going to set up. They may do that up here. It'd probably be easiest. And of course, I want to give a big shout out of thanks. Haishka, our hands are raised to our Indigenous Voices poets for this evening's program. Haishka, our hands are raised. And of course, to all of you, our hands are raised for joining us this evening. Thank you for joining us. It's been a wonderful evening. Again, thanks for everybody for making this possible and a success. And I'd love to have the poets come over this way and get a photograph. Thank you.